naganed wapsk naga kchimalsam could we babate magnaji gigi hinen naga welcome to he talks with Mozigisk namasizig Possesom naga libaw said nukmas Leeuwentube sida Pamausawagan Nidlage. So
Oh, miigwech. Before we start, we'd like to miigwech to Ron for the prayer. We always start our meetings in prayer, and we end our meetings in prayer. That is to give us a good mind intent. That is to have our hearts open, our minds open, our eyes for seeing what's going on, and our ears for listening. We also have protocols that says the person talking is the one that gets the floor, and until they're done, um, we don't say anything. That's the mute button that we're going to be putting ourselves on. So unfortunately, one of our elders was not able to participate as she found herself with a toothache last night, so unable to attend today, and we are sorry not to see Chickadee, who was going to be with us today, but we do wish her the best and hope that we'll be meeting her later on in another webinar, I'm sure. So I'd like to take this time to just a last blurb for me. I'd like to introduce an elder whom I have known for many, many years. He's done many things in his community. He's from Oneida, part of the Six Nations by the Thames, along the river of the Thames. So if you can, I'd like to introduce Cliff Summers.
Good morning. First of all, I should introduce myself. As Michelle said, I'm from Oneida. I have a spirit name, which is it's a Lakota name. A lot of my teachings are inspired from my being a sun dancer and a pipe carrier, and I've been clean and sober. I just celebrated 40 years of sobriety on December 8th. And so I always like to explain that when I did that, when I started to this journey of what became 40 years of sobriety, I always explain that I did that on purpose. And as I mentioned, I'm from Oneida. So according to our custom as a matrilineal society, I'm Wolf Clan after my mother. And but I asked my mother's permission because it's our custom as a matrilineal society to follow our mothers. And I asked my mother's permission for me to devote my life and myself to my teachings, which, as I mentioned, is based on the Lakota teachings. And so she gave me her blessing, which was important to me. And so even though I do still have a lot of family back home, I have an extended family. And in the Lakota language, they call it a Teoshpe, which means extended family, literally. And so it's not a clan system per se, but it is an extended network of, like it's a kinship. And so I just thought I should explain that. But my traditional name is Owe Taninkeya Mani, which in the Lakota language, that means that my tracks appear as I walk. And so so my Lakota name, Owe Taninkeya Mani, is basically how I like to represent myself, because that's going to be my legacy. So my legacy based on upon our achievements and upon our what we do in our life or with our life is how we become known. And so, you know, when we identify who we are, there's a whole lot of our story that goes with it. Some people could say history, but that doesn't work for women. So it's not his story; it's our story. And so today, I'm very honored to be invited to join on this very important discussion. And so, you know, as according to our custom, ordinarily, if we were sitting in a gathering in a circle, the person who would be talking would have a talking stick, um, or a feather, and we would just pass it from one person. And after that person is done talking, then it would go to the next person. But this is a webinar. What my understanding is that as elders, we're going to be given some time to speak, and then I guess questions will probably happen afterwards. And so I think one of the staff will be available as moderators to orchestrate the questions. So so the topic is the eighth fire, and so we pulled virtual straws, and I won the the opportunity to speak first. But I want to recognize my fellow elders and acknowledge Chickadee, who couldn't be with us, Chickadee Richards. And as Michelle said, hopefully she'll be able to join in other webinars. But so, yes, I'm from Oneida, and I recall that when I would go to gatherings, especially elders gatherings, because I started, I should mention, growing up in Oneida, when I was probably, well, I was in school, and I estimate I was probably in about grade 4 or 5. And and I remember being in class and being told that our people, the Iroquois people, of which we are described or affiliated with or by, I was told that our people are savages and we're pagans. And that, what's kind of vivid about that for me, and how it impacted me, was it was vivid in the sense that even to this day, like I just celebrated the 15th anniversary of my 45th birthday. So I'm 45. But anyway, you know, I'm 60. I'm sure you did the math in your head. But what I recall about being told that we are savages, or the Iroquois people, in reference to our people, our nation, that we were described and depicted historically. And I remember vividly, because I was just talking about this the other night, that the teacher in front of the classroom held a book which said Canadian history. And what kind of stands out even at this time, you know, 50 years later, is that the red maple leaf on the history book was so vivid. And so that even now, as I'm telling you, I can still see the image of this red maple leaf. And so when I was told that our people, And in our culture, in our language, we refer to ourselves as Haudenosaunee, which is people of the Longhouse. But we were referred to by the French, I think, as Iroquois, which is not that. It's very kind of, it's a disparaging reference. But so when I was told that our people are savages and pagans, it was kind of a shock to my sensibilities, probably as a 10 or 11-year-old at the time. More so for the fact that the person who was my teacher, my history teacher, was from back home. She was from Oneida. And so at that time during that period of time, during that era, I guess, we were kind of taught to respect authority, and we were taught to respect our elders. And so, there was not a whole lot of room for debate, especially when the presentation, like I said, was in the classroom. And the history that was being referred to was Canadian history, is according to the name on the textbook. And the reference historically was regarding the Iroquois people. So, it's not like we had a debate in class about, are you a savage? Are you a pagan? We were just told that's what we were. And so that kind of introduced me to a dislike for school. And consequently, I didn't graduate from high school. I should mention, I just finished a paralegal studies program in February. And so I had to go back to school, which is kind of like the irony, because of my dislike for the education system or the depiction of my people through history as being savages and being pagans. I didn't finish, like I said, I didn't finish high school, and I didn't. But I started a whole journey, which began, as I said, 40 years ago, to learn my culture and to learn my the customs and the ceremonies. And so I became a pipe carrier. I became a sun dancer. And I've been a singer throughout that time. And so when I asked my mother for permission to learn the teachings and the customs and the ceremonies of the Lakota people, I did that because I really found an acceptance there. And so I started my journey. And the other thing I should mention, part of that journey, apart from going out to fast, apart from sun dancing and learning songs and so on that I learned and that I've been studying, but part of the journey entailed going to elders gatherings, elders conferences. And so I went to a lot of elders gatherings. And I remember it was kind of very striking. It was vivid. Because the elders would say, in reference to us, the audience, that we are the seventh fire. And as the seventh fire, and it sounded very exciting, we're the seventh fire. And I admit that I felt a sense of pride, that there was a place for me and there was a role for me, and how I was referenced by the elders. We're the seventh fire, and we're going to ignite and light the eighth fire. And so as much as I really appreciated that, was kind of thinking, well, darn, it's kind of too bad and too sad for my mom and my dad and my family in that generation, because, you know, they came that close. um, but they're going to miss out. And I mean, it's funny that I felt that way, but that's how I felt. You know, I felt fortunate for being a member of the generation who was referred to as the seventh fire. But at the same time, like I was, like I said, I kind of felt bad for my the elders in our community, or my parents' generation, because they came that close and they missed out. So maybe they would have been, in that context, they would have been the sixth fire. Because, like I said, being the seventh fire, or being referred to as the seventh fire, was very exciting. You know, the elders at a gathering acknowledged us and pointed us out, and said who we were, and that's how they described us. But what I guess what I reflected on through ceremony and in prayer is I reflected on the fact that in my life, I knew my great grandparents. I actually got to know who they were. Um, and we'd go and visit with them and spend some time with them. I knew my great grandparents on my mother's side, so it was my mom's grandparents, but they were my great grandparents, and so they would have been, you know, in my experience, they would have been the first fire, and in the next generation, which was my grandmother and my grandfather and my grandparents, their generation was the second fire. And then obviously, you know, my dad's mom passed away when I was young. I was 6 years old when she passed away, so I didn't get to know her as much. But my grandfather on my mom's side, Clifford Dockstader, who was my grandfather, I never met him because he had passed away before I was born. He passed away 2 years before I was born. And my father, Taylor Summers, passed away before I was born as well. So I carry both of their names. Clifford Taylor is the names that my mom gave me, and those were the names of my grandfather and my father. And so I I got to, like I said, I got to know my great grandparents, and so in my understanding and in my frame of reference, they were the first generation that I can recall, the first fire that I referred to, and my grandparents were the second fire, or the second generation of my memory, and my mom was the fourth generation, or third generation, I should say. I'm the fourth generation in my family, and my children are the fifth generation, the fifth fire. And so, you know, my daughters and my son doesn't have any children yet, but my two oldest daughters, I have two older daughters, and between the two of them, Tisha has 5 daughters. So I have 5 granddaughters from my oldest daughter, Tisha, and I have 2 grandsons from my second oldest daughter. And anyway, so they're the fifth fire, and I had so my daughter has my grandchildren, and so those are the sixth generation. And so, in my experience, in my reference to the eighth fire is based on the fact that that if I treat myself, kindly and live a good life, and as I explained, I've celebrated 40 years of sobriety. That I have every right opportunity, I guess, to know my great grandchildren, which will be the eighth fire, the eighth generation. And so, even though I kind of explained that I felt bad because being told by the elders that we were the seventh generation, we're the seventh fire, that my parents missed out. They lived their whole life and they only made it to the sixth fire. But I realized that we each have the opportunity, and that's my point. We each have the opportunity to know our great grandchildren, and if we knew our great grandparents, then we will be able to ignite. We will see the ignition of the eighth fire from our grandchildren, and so I realized I was just given a message from our sponsors, and so I know my time is pretty much up, but that's what I wanted to explain, about the eighth fire is that I could say as an elder to the audience, especially the younger generation, yous are the seventh fire, and yous will ignite and light the eighth fire, as I was told. But what I understand about what that means is that we each have the opportunity, if we're lucky, we each have the opportunity to know if we knew who our great grandparents were, we each have the opportunity to know our grandchildren or our great grandchildren, and they will become the eighth fire, and so it goes, and so life will continue, and the circle of life continues. And to me, that is what it means for me, my understanding of the eighth fire. And so with that, I'll say in our language, Yongo, thank you very much for listening. And hopefully, I think as I understand it, there's going to be questions too later. So, but that's it for me for now. So Yongo, Dakyas, and all my relations.
Miigwech Cliff. I'm going to pass it over to Ishbel, and Ishbel's going to introduce our next elder. Miigwech.
Thank you. So Miigam'agan, if you want to turn your camera on, that would be awesome. I just want to say that it's great to be having this session, and somebody who grew up hearing all the prophecies, and I've been hearing younger ones talking about this is the time of the prophecies that we're living through with, when the earth would get sick and have the shakes and throw up, and we're seeing the earthquakes and the volcanoes and all the things that are happening. And so it is an amazing time that we're living in. And I think being able to get direction on things that we need to be doing to help the earth and help each other is really good. So I want to introduce Miigam'agan, who is someone from the East. She's a clan mother from the Juggitch clan, the Lobster clan, from up in northern New Brunswick, and has been involved in learning her traditions for her entire life, and for fighting for around bringing back the matricultural ways and the clan mothers, and just building healthy communities in all kinds of ways. So I'm really happy to be able to pass the virtual talking stick over to Miigam'agan. So turn your speaker on. There you go, Mig.
Okay, thank you, Ish. Thank you, Cliff, for sharing. Really appreciate what you were sharing about the generations. And it's really an honor to meet you today as well. And I want to say that I want to acknowledge that I know that I'm having a little advantage of being in the writing relations. That I'm very conscious about being among knowledge keepers who are here with us in the webinar today. And so, and I want to also thank Writing Relations for honoring our ancestors and as their descendants to be given the first voice, to be able to share the teachings of our ancestors in this webinar, in our circle, virtual circle together. It's a little strange, but you know, hey, we have to be imagine ourselves and work with what we have today. I think what I wanted to share a little bit about today was about the discussions about stoking the 8th fire. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Okay, stoking the 8th fire, and I'm still very first of all, like when we speak about the teachings, it's coming from a place that's so old from our homelands. And here in Ralsibuk and Eskenuabadich is one of the Wabanaki languages that is still spoken. And so when we talk about that exchange of knowledge, exchange of worldview, somewhere along those discussions, the worldview gets lost in the crack because we keep sifting and bringing this exchange into outside of our realm, the way we were raised according to the language, because the stories that we heard about through our language and how it was passed down at these times. We've been waiting for these times, and so you know, this is according to my great grandmother's passing down at this time with with her grandchildren, because it's the grandchildren. It's almost like it skips a generation. The grandparents have the most influence on the grandchildren. So it was my great grandmother probably learning this from her great grandparents or grandparents who did pass this information down through their language. And so when we talk about these times, you know, I have to remember the importance about this time. And for us, when we talk about the 8th fire, like we would say, Agotmuchin, or Sisue. And the fire in our language, Sisue, is about our consciousness. These ancient teachers, Sisue, Cebu, Mahamigil, Sithamu, you know, we're talking about Sithamu, our sacred earth mother, Sisue, our sacred fire, teacher, Cebu, the rivers that flow, this is the bloodline, the veins of our mother. These all have the same root word because it's all about us going into that deeper consciousness. So the stoking the eighth fire is for us all to come to that collective, return to that collective consciousness. And it's the time, this is a time because Okumulchin is 8, but it's not number 8. It's just much more of a higher understanding of mathematics when we look at that in our language and our understanding. So Okumulchin is because there's different levels of looking at it through our language. We have our language is multidimensional. It's mother based, and it comes from the heart. It comes from love. Therefore, our language that we understood growing up and we learned in the womb of our mothers, that it was love-based, and the language before colonization was in its truest form. It was founded on unconditional love, motherhood, and so the language did not have any derogatory words, and no words that would discount or devalue life. It was all about a fullness and about becoming higher, full human beings. So this is what existed. This is what evolved. Because globally, it's not this information is because we were the last group to be contacted and colonized, so, which is still very much strong for us, and now we're kind of like resifting and reconnecting to try and heal it from how it was recorded and collected in the dictionaries and how it's being interpreted now over the past 400-500 years. So now it's like reclaiming and re-understanding ourselves, and so I wanted to share in the 80s. And I know this is ancient, and I know some of the listeners in our community here today will probably remember this because in the 80s we went to the harmonic conversions, and we understood that in our time as the beginning of the labor pain. Wakchi Usitkamwadige and giving you like the new birth of life is coming forward. And so we made our journey at that time. I just became a new mom. And so we started making our rounds through the Wabanaki homelands all the way down to southern New England to go to all the ceremonial areas to offer prayers to reconnect with our ancestors and our relatives. And this is much more than just human experience, human life. When we say ancestors, we're talking about the cosmic family. We have a human history that Cliff talked about, those the generations of the fires, and then we have the cosmic family, so and the human family. So this is much on another level. So we're in the Miigam'agan, which is what the language is identified now, according to my culture, or this part of the roots, is that we're Miigam'agan. But historically, we only knew ourselves as human beings. And so we had a dialect that was part of the Algonquin, which is Algonquin. And so that great connection, we wove our truth and stories right across the land from where the concepts, those relationships existed, and that information was part of the teachings we received from the rivers, from the animals. Our first teachers in our plant systems are found to acknowledge our first family, our relatives, which is the Dian moose, caribou, halibu, and the wolf. So these are our clans, our original clans, and we were taught by them. And so it was, if you observe creation and our life on our Sacred Mother, they taught us to be who we are. When I say they, my ancestors, we've got kind of sidetracked along from a new thinking, capitalism and colonization, and this is not putting it on any particular group of people, but all human beings have been impacted by this first distraction that that set us off course. And so it started on the other side of our Sacred Mother, and it's made its journey here. And it did one thing to all of us. It disconnected us from our land, disconnected us from our true selves, who we are as a people. And so our ancient languages, if we begin to restore our ancient languages and reconnect with them, the answers, all the solutions are in them. But they became outlawed. Spiritual practices globally, speaking of ancient languages, were outlawed, and we have to question why. Why was that outlawed? And then, but it's to bring that back, and it's really bringing us back to the center, to the heart of who we are and why we are and how we are to be here. We're part of a very important time, and this is what ceremonies was talking about, and I know our next speaker will be talking about that. When we talk about fasting, this is bringing us a meditation, bringing us back deep into us, to our origin, where all the knowledge, our ancestral knowledge is kept in, and raising that collective consciousness, the eighth fire. It starts within us, and then awakening and stoking that fire inside, and moving the sibu, which is the blood, that blood, and which is sibu, and sizue is the life force. The fire and water is that life force that needs to be stoked in us, so we would be able to connect and listen to those dimensional beings that our ancestors had a relationship with. In our understanding of this time, if we can bring ourselves to that deeper awakening of consciousness, then we will be able to see who is among us to help us through this time. And it's not really helping us that we help to be part of a team of these dimensional beings that are among us that we cannot see because we're not awake yet. So the eighth fire is a time of a great awakening of consciousness and reconnecting to the life force. When the wind moves, and it's moving this time of the year, it's doing their original responsibility. They're moving the ice, we've got about 3 feet of snow still here. So they're moving the ice the move in the air, circulating and awakening us up to circulating inside us. I see Ishbel, is my time up?
You've got about 4 more minutes.
Okay, so I wanted to maybe just to inspire and not inspire, to bring this part of our understanding of this time. It's, as our ancestors have said, we've been waiting and we came this time for that reason. And for me personally, every time I'm invited to do a traditional welcoming and an open ceremony, my part of my ceremony, it's my mantra, they would say in another culture or language. Um, I always request that we remember why we have returned in this room, and to have courage to uphold our responsibilities to what we are here for, and to be able to work with all the spiritual dimensions that are among us that we can feel but not see yet, and to be part of that larger community so we can raise and create a life that we're all dreaming about. And that this is the time of reconnecting. We'll return to this time again, and we will, if we can transition our next generation into the new what's coming. We are the gods to our grandchildren, and we have to make it an easy transition for them. So now we have to start weaning them out of this old world, and reintroducing them to connecting with the land and connecting with themselves. So, and I think it's happening. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Mig. You really touched on a lot of it, both the connecting and the responsibility that we have to be working hard to do that connection, to make it easier for our grandchildren. So Mig, if you could introduce our next speaker. Turn your mic on, Mig.
Okay, so I'm still kind of vibrating from when I do the ceremony, and then I bring the ancestors to come and be present with them. I get so thank you. So I wanted to. For me, it's always an honor to introduce Ron, and actually, I haven't really introduced him. I think this is my second time. Oh, so I will introduce the next speaker, and he is a Woolastook Grand Chief in the Woolastookowee Wabanaki homeland of the people of the Don. His name is Spasaqsit Possesom. It is for me. It's he's truly my first true experience of witnessing a traditional leader. I just love him very much. He's a great colleague and who I go to talk about the language. I've known him for a very long time. He's always among great women, good men, and that because of his influence, that he's surrounded by a lot of people that are very and loved by communities. And and he was raised by these beautiful people from Oostergourie. And despite all that's happened, from the woundedness of our colonial experiences to traumas and so on, he always manages to be calm and to work with us, and it's always safe to be around him. So it's a real honor to introduce you.
Siwalawan, Miigam'agan. Kada widamit laza welcome wag sagate naga Olsen Witskud naga Jimmy Dumont to Needle Pasidagaki me wagano. First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge my teachers, two of which have passed on to the spirit world to join our ancestors. One is Sagate Gwen Bear, who was my clan mother and grandmother, who has taught me through fasting, through ceremonies, through her gentle and loving kindness. And she taught me about gratitude, about always to be thankful, and always taught me to put forward each morning when I put my feet on the floor is to give gratitude from the center of Mother Earth to up to the universe, to where Father Sky is, and all that's in between. And also, I want to give much gratitude and thankful for Olsen Witskud, Harry Laporte, who was the previous Grand Chief and who has taught me about my responsibility as a man, as a leader, as a partner, as a father, as a grandfather, as a brother, as an uncle. So I want to thank him. And Jim Dumont, who's the Madei, or what we say in our language, the Madebalan teacher, who brought back here over, I think about 12, 13 years ago, that brought back the traditional teachings of the Madei here. And we had built many long houses here and took part in these beautiful ceremonies within the longhouse. And it through the longhouse, it really taught us our responsibilities as males, as females, as two-spirited people. So I want to thank Jim Dumont and Shelley Charles too, who usually traveled with Jim to bring back the original teachings to here at Wabanagig and Wabanagug. So I want to share yes, the vision of the eighth fire and the teachings that I received through ceremonies and through the teachings of various knowledge keepers of the seventh fire. That yes, I concur with my brother Clifford, and the irony of Clifford's talk is that 41 years ago, on December the 8th, was my 20th birthday, and that's the morning that I too quit abusing my body with substance. So it's 41 years for me, and that's when I started my journey on learning about our traditional ways too. So what I want to talk about is last year when we were at Penobscot homeland at a place called Nambizon, a place of the medicine, where Sherry Mitchell had brought together a lot of the elders, knowledge keepers, and peoples from across the world. And Jim Dumont was one of the persons that she invited, and Kevin Deere from the Ganawage, who brought forth messages from the longhouse there. And just prior to the gathering last July, is that I usually do a lot of ceremonies in preparation to any major gatherings like this. So I was doing approximately 2 months of ceremony, as that was taught to me by Gwen Sagate to do. And I was getting these revelations and these visions from the ancestors, from our people here, is that exactly what the eighth fire is. And as Clifford said, and we are the seventh fire, our generation of peoples. And our children are the ones who carry the embers of the seventh fire. But our grandchildren are the eighth fire. They're the ones who are going to be born or have been born with the wisdom and knowledge from the ancestors. And I have personally witnessed throughout many ceremonies and many gatherings that I've been a part of, is I strategically watch all these young ones that are around ceremony, and I could see how respectful they are and how knowledgeable and wise they are already about the ceremonies and how the ceremonies unfold. So the eight fire are the ones that's been born from our children. So it's our grandchildren. And I have 10 grandsons, and each one of my grandsons hold this magical and powerful gift. Each one of them has this very unique gift, and they're very knowledgeable already about the love and respect they have for Mother Earth, for water, for the animals, for everything in creation. And what I was told through ceremony is what our responsibilities are as the grandparents is to just help guide and direct the children of the eighth fire. That's our responsibility. They know a lot of these wonderful and powerful teachings already. And it's our job just to guide and direct them and steer them on that good red road. So I shared this last year during our gathering last July at the Healing Turtle Island gathering at Penobscot homeland. And this made me think of back in 1993, I was going to university here at the University of New Brunswick. And one spring, the elder and the wampum keeper, William Commanda from Maniwaki, came down to be one of the guest speakers at university during the spring gathering we had here. And his nephew had literally dragged in this great big suitcase. It was before they put wheels on suitcases. So, and I was wondering if he had rocks in there, because his his grandson was around 6 feet tall. So I thought, man, that's a pretty weighted suitcase. So as his nephew unzipped or grandson unzipped the suitcase, and he started to unroll and unfold this huge wampum belt that William carried, and it was quite long and approximately 25 feet long by a foot wide. And so William spent a whole during that evening talking about the prophecy of that belt. He started off from the creation story, and he finished at this symbol on the wampum belt of a crossroad. So part of his whole talk that night was talking about how we as human beings were created last, because we would be the ones who would be the most destructive through life. So we were the ones who would lose our ways and lose our path, but we would have to come back to that time period, is that we have to revisit and reclaim the original teachings that was brought forth to our peoples. And as he said throughout his teachings, that we all receive teachings. Each nation across the world received their own bundles, their own teachings, and what their responsibilities were. And we here on the in North America were the keepers of the earth and the waters. That was our responsibility. But throughout time, that we would lose our ways too. And then slowly, from the seventh fire to the eighth fire, is when there would be a great awakening. And he called it the awakening of the rainbow warriors. He says many nations, many young people from many nations will wake up one day and realize that the earth, air, water, fire is at risk. That there'll become a time that we will come to these crossroads, and we as humanity will have to decide which road to take, the green path or the road to destruction. And during that time period is that when these rainbow warriors will awaken, and they will come to some realization that because it will affect their children and their future generations if we don't take that good red road, that green path. So here we are, and he spoke about viruses too. And this was back in 1993. And he was told this by his great grandfather. So these Wampum Belt prophecy teachings came from his great grandfather to his grandfather to his father to him. So and he talked about this great sickness that's going to befall and come to men and all people, is that, and he said the rhyme and reason why we are getting sick or will get sick is because what we're doing to the earth, what we're doing to the all creation, to the animals, to the water, to the air. And to get back to that balance, those original teachings that were brought forth from our very first creation, is that we have to shift. And he talked about this great shift that we all are going to be a part of. And he described it in this way. He said, the people will run to the river, and the river will be flowing so fast and the rapids be going so hard that a massive amount of the young people will jump in those rapids, knowing the fact that eventually those rapids will turn into smoother, more calmer waters. And that's the road that we must take. Those are the rivers we must take. He says, but some will jump in the river and be frightened because of the rapids, and they'll be grabbing from the sides and trying to get back up on the banks, and they will drown. But there will be many standing at the banks just watching the rapids go by. He said, those ones will be left behind. Those ones will be the ones who will have to go through this devastation and this destruction. And he talked about that there'll be a time where the wealthiest people in the world will be the people who know how to live off the land, who can plant their own food, who has food security, water security, who can live off the land, who still rely on our traditional medicines, our traditional foods. So I see it here in the East. A lot of our people and a lot of the like allies that we rub shoulder to shoulder with, going back to gardening and food sovereignty. I have numerous friends right now who's teaching a lot of our own people how to create their own gardens once again. So this is the road we need to take. This is that greener path that we need to take into maintaining food sovereignty, our own medicines, our own water security. So this prophecy that William Commanda had brought forth back in 1993 has come to the present. And I remember because I was sitting right in the front, and he told me, he pointed at me, he said, young man, which I was back then, I was 33 years old, he said, you will see this come to pass. But he said, but I'll be gone. William has been passed on for around, I think, 9 to 10 years now. So, but William Commander's teachings still go forward because he had touched many, 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 many lives, and his wonderful, loving teachings has moved on, and it has enlightened many, many people. So I want to acknowledge him too, the great William Commanda. I just met him a couple of times, but it was, I spent those times sitting and listening to him and his wise words. And Art Manuels, another man who I want to acknowledge. Art brought forth a lot of teachings, wise teachings in his time. We have rebuilt our longhouse here, physically and spiritually here. And the beauty of our longhouse, because we are originally longhouse people, is when you walk into the longhouse, you walk in the eastern door. That's the door where the first light comes, where the Wabanagig or Chwabanagig, the people of the first light. So the entry door is in the east. The exit door, when our life is finished, is at the west. So we are required to sit in a place within a longhouse, depending on the age of the person. And the men sit on the left and the women sit on the right. And the two-spirited people who come into the lodge have their own selection where they want to sit. And the beauty of sitting in the longhouse is, depending on your age, you can look back to where the eastern door is, and you can see where you've come from, how you've grown, and to the place where you sit there. And when you look down to your left and to where the elders sit and all these knowledge keepers, these very strong spiritual people, and you can look forward to one day sitting there to where they sit, to gain all that wisdom and knowledge. And this is a true sense of balance, of seeing the responsibilities of our two-spirited people, of the women and the men. It's the whole structure itself is our constitution. It tells us exactly who we are, what we need to do, and what our responsibilities are. And these were our original teachings. And I failed to mention at the beginning, which I will now, is that when we as Wabanagi were created from that great tree, the ash tree, where we make our baskets from, we came from the deep roots from that beautiful tree and came up, evolved. So our first treaties and covenant was with the earth, was with all creation. We completely understood what our responsibilities were, and that sense of balance So we have to go back to those original teachings. And again, I want to thank all my teachers for this wonderful knowledge, and especially the ancestors of the Wabanagi and the Wolastoqiyik. And to finish off, Wolastoq is this beautiful and bountiful river that flows through our homeland. And we call ourselves Wolastoqiyik, which means the people of the beautiful and bountiful river. So our responsibility is to that river. And we have to get back to that responsibility in keeping her clean and flowing. So, Kchiwaliwan, thank you.
Miigwech. That was wonderful. And I'm pretty sure there's enough information here to have a heck of a lot of questions. So I see this raised hand on the side here. Is that something that's, no? Okay,
Yep.
I didn't know what it was there, but I thought, hey, that sounds good. Everybody raise your hands now. Hey!
I think the raised hands means people's questions.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking, but I don't know where I'm finding the raised hands.
Well, I can let you know if people raise hands as the host. So if anybody has a question or wants to make a comment, I can kind of keep a list of. Does anybody feel called?
Ron, you had mentioned about grandfather William Commanda. I had the opportunity, the pleasure of being able to drum. Our group ended up drumming for him when he received the key to Ottawa, which was an amazing event that day, and I still remember it warmly. But I do know that Cliff Summers has many teachings from him, as he spent a lot of time with him. Cliff, maybe perhaps you'd like to share a little bit about what you've learned from him. As people are able to ask questions, you're able to ask questions, but more information is available if you like.
Well, I would just maybe echo the words from Ron. You know, I did spend a long time with grandfather William, and every June 21st would be he would host a gathering at Victoria Island, which is part of their unceded territory for the Algonquin people, and he would have a pipe ceremony. So each year that we would do that, and I did it every year that I was in Ottawa until he passed away. But I was the singer for him during his ceremonies. But his whole life was, especially the last half of his life, was in service to our people, and it was the legacy that he left for us. He created an organization called the Circle of All Nations, and as you could well imagine, the Circle of All Nations was, I think, Ron made reference to the Rainbow Warriors. It was the fact that, you know, all people, all our relations. That's what, you know, what we say in prayer and what we say in ceremony. When we finish, we always say, "All my relations." Well, that was a legacy, and that was something that grandfather lived. And the creation of the Circle of All Nations was to manifest that whole idea of a place for the Rainbow Warriors and a place for our people to all come together. And so, yeah, it was good to hear. It was beautiful, actually, to hear the sharing from Ron of his participation at the gathering where William gave his. Because I would be at a lot of gatherings where he would have his wampum, because he had many wampums for the Algonquin Nation. He was the elder for the Algonquin Nation, and so it was always amazing to observe him give a presentation of the wampum. different whatever wampum it was. So yeah. Are there any other questions that any of the people have? I'm just going to mute my speaker again. If there's any other questions for me, then I can just unmute it. But thank you, go.
Yes, please. Now is the time to start asking questions, or we can just have the elders tell stories, whatever your choice is. If we can kind of have somebody at least jump in and let me know what it is that you'd like, because there's lots of stories to be told today, too.
I have a question.
Hey, you got it.
Well, hi. Thank you all so much, Miigwech, Walala, and Shukran for the teachings this morning. It's feeling so heartful, like heart-filled. So thank you. My question is one of, I guess, like wanting guidance, seeking guidance, just in terms of, yeah, any wisdom on how best to move through these times. How best to, I mean, of course I have my own ways of connecting to spirit and my own practices, but I would just love to hear from any of the elders in the space around, yeah, what you've learned over time of staying grounded, of staying connected, of staying rooted in spirit, and being able to maintain that rootedness in times when it is so stormy. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to share a couple things, Nat, is that, I've been doing like ceremonies each morning and each night before I go to bed. When I wake up, I connect with the ancestors, and I ask them for guidance. And this time and space that we're all in, and this virus that is attacking the world, is a teacher. And we have to understand that this is a teacher that's wants to wake us up as humanity, is to shift our whole lives around in how we can't go back what is called the norm. There is no such thing as the norm. We have to shift our whole lives in how we treat the earth, the water, the air, treat human beings, treat all creation. And I was in deep conversation with some of the clan mothers just a week ago, and because there's a lot of our of the allies that come to us as indigenous people, searching for guidance, and we all kind of agreed that you have to find your own bundles, meaning that from your own background, whether you're Celtic or whatever nationality that you've come from, you have to find your own bundles and rely on your own bundles, and trust in that. Pray to the ancestors from your people. Trust in them that they'll guide you, because we all were earth-based people at one time. We all lived and we totally relied on the earth. And I know, especially for females, what my grandmothers and clan mothers had taught me is the moon is the energy for women. And the irony is tonight is full moon. So what I tell my female friends and colleagues is, go out and talk to her, and to give something to her, whether it's food, tobacco, or whatever you want. What's a gift from your nation is to talk to the grandmother, and talk to your mother, the earth, and that balance between the earth and sky, that'll guide you. And I've been blessed with so many beautiful grandmother teachings, and they've grounded me, because I've got this what they call the male ego, and they've grounded me, and they said, you're just a man. That's all you are. But you're a great man, but you're just a man. So this is my, my little 2 cents to you. And find your bundle. Find where your nations, what your bundle is. Chiwaliwan?
So we've had a question in the chat area of lots of thank you for the powerful words, and thank you for the sharing of the story. And the question is, what should we be mindful of when we're jumping in the river, when we're jumping in the rapids? What do we need to be mindful of so that we can flow down the river rather than go into a panic?
Be thankful. I would say, that's part of it's an essential part of our time together. Whenever we come together in ceremony, or whenever we come together, even in meetings, we always start with a time of thankfulness, of giving thanks. And so, in the scenario that was described, falling in the river, even that has a sense of, like my brother just said, this time of this pandemic, it's an opportunity. It's a time for us to come together to remember what's important. And so earlier, when I talked about, in answer to the question that the young lady raised, even about what to do, I was talking about that when I chose to begin my journey, I chose to do it and to give up alcohol and any kind of substances. And I mentioned that I did that on purpose. And so part of it is you have to determine what your purpose is. And so, as Ron was just saying, you have to put together your bundle. That's part of the journey. That's defining, what your identity is going to be, what your legacy is going to be. So, when I consider myself to be very fortunate to have been able to have someone like Grandfather William Commanda as a teacher, because he lived, like I said, his whole life was spent in manifesting the circle of all nations. So every year I would go to he would have a special gathering. People would come literally from all over the world to his home in Kirigan Zibi, and it was for a weekend or a week long of gathering, of teachings, of ceremony, and really a time to be together. So he actually lived this idea of the Rainbow Warriors, and he made a time in a space, in a place for it, right in his own home. And consequently, because there were people from literally all over the world, and people of different ethnicities, so people even in his own community would kind of ridicule him, because and it's kind of sad that that's the truth, but he, on the other hand, he was true to his teachings. And so when he talked about Rainbow Warriors, it's like when we, like I said, in our ceremonies, when we say all my relations, we're inclusive. We don't discriminate. And so even though I'm from Oneida and a member of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, I still have family in South Dakota, in Pine Ridge. My extended family extends from there. The Teoshwe that I refer to is based in Pine Ridge. But because of that, I have relatives, relations, brothers, sisters, family right across Turtle Island. And so if you're gonna fall in the river, be thankful, and brace yourself, because you're about to learn what's important. And at the same time, you know, it was funny because when I was, I remember it was very vivid again. But when I turned 10 years old, I remember looking to the heavens and saying, you know, asking, you know, the perennial question, you know, where do we fit? You know, what place is there for us? Because it was well known, the place of the of white, you know, society is the, you know, even at 10 years old, I knew that, and I would think of them as the dominant society. And I knew there was a place for blacks in society, was a place for Asians in society, but where was the place for our people, as indigenous people? And that question that I asked to the heavens, and I looked up and I asked, you know, where do I fit in? Where do we fit in? Because I wasn't willing to accept that we are savages. I wasn't willing to accept that we are pagans. And so in my trying to define my purpose, that was one of the questions that I asked. And so that, as it turns out, that year, that summer, one of our elders said, is Ongwe Hongwe people, we are the caretakers of Mother Earth. And I remember when he said that, and he instructed all of my peers. So there was a group of us young boys. We were standing together, and he was teaching us, and that's one of the things that he taught us. He said that is Ongwe Hongwe, which in our language, that just simply means the people, is the indigenous people. We are the caretakers of Mother Earth. And that resonated for me. That hit a place of in my body. I remember accepting and feeling, okay, now I know. You know, go, thank you. And so when I started sun dancing, I just remember, and I was in Rosebud at the time. This was in the early 80s or mid 80s. And I just remember it being so extremely hot that I was, in my mind, I was coming up with all of the reasons why I was going to quit. The first being is because I'm Oneida, and we have we have a longhouse, and I don't have to be there, and so I was going to quit, and so that was a convenient excuse, because it was too unbelievably, supernaturally, and I thought, hot. And so I was thinking, well, what the blank am I doing here? I don't have to be here. But I remembered that what my elder in our community informed us about what our role is as caretakers of Mother Earth. And so what I decided, instead of quitting, I contemplated the fact that nobody told me I had to Sundance. That was a decision that I made on my own. Part of the purpose for me at the time, that was what the purpose was that I defined for myself. I was going to Sundance, and so I was going to give, I was going to sacrifice. And so when I decided to stay, it was because I thought, well, in the 24 years or however long it was that I had lived on Mother Earth, the least that I could do is to spend that time, those 4 days, in ceremony, giving thanks and appreciating that as a caretaker of Mother Earth, then this time would be spent from me for giving thanks. And so be it, your mind, you know, go.
I'd like
So
to
we,
add, if it's okay. I wanted to add to to Natalie's response or question, and I wanted to add to what was shared very briefly. I won't be long, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so, and I'm just reading some of the other questions that are there. One of the things that I wanted to look at is what, for me, I draw on my the ancient language, and so we all come from ancient culture of ancient languages. So I think when we talk about our bundles, the language is really a blueprint of our access to those ancient worldviews. And so I wanted to also look talk about maybe just to remind, like when we look at that, for us, we always talk about um, the ancient language, the symbolisms. So when we look at like what the bundle, like we, the first and foremost is about acknowledging who we are in this realm, and about the source of our own source. So a dimnek for us would be the inner world. And so trusting the inner world, we've been so severed. When we talk about being severed in different dimensions, like humanity being severed from our sacred mother, we have also been severed from our inner world and dimnek, where all the knowledge is kept through those river, our veins, and so on. All that knowledge move within our own inner world and dimnek. So that's, to me, like the first thing we need to do is acknowledge that inner bundle, stoke and awaken that inner bundle, move, and breathe. Gamlamin, like gamlamin is to feed the fuel. I don't like speaking English because it's so militarized. Everything is about like aggression and like so on. But so it's to awaken that inner world. And when we talk about, when I'm listening to the Rainbow Warriors, Rainbow Society, River, those symbol of fire and river is really one and the same. It's really about consciousness, awaken and become part of the greater consciousness. And so the river is, when we talk about our creation story, how the human being had to cross the river to get teachings from the grandmother. The river represents that flow, that consciousness. The ancient symbolisms are a key, and so no one has to corner on the truth. So it's really important that when, as I'm hearing the elders, all these teachings have been echoed through in time, we're all being guided to look at who we are, our ancestral connections. And this is much more than just land. I mean, like our human connections, but about land. And so I would encourage that, finding that that recipe of how to connect yourself, because we're capable of it, very capable of that. So it's awakening the inner world. And when we talk about trauma, I've experienced trauma several times in my life, but more recently I had experienced a trauma, and so I can see how instantaneous. I went into a 4-day fast to ground myself, because trauma can really like splat you or scatter you, and so I and to go on a 4-day fast to kind of ground me, to bring me back to that source, and because if you, like when we're off centered and we go into the physical realm, the ego, because, and that's an ego is a teacher and a gift. It took me down to a space where the ego cannot go, and it's in the deepest part of darkness. Western system would call deep depression in the dark, but the spiritualists across the world would call it the dark night of the soul, where the sacred dwells. So at that time, I understood why some of our people who experience major trauma don't come back. They're physically still strong, but they don't come back fully. They stay part of that other realm. And so I know Western science has diagnosed it as schizophrenia or bipolarism, however, but in the ancient this language on draws on this is that is a sacred state we've learned to be afraid of. Children are being born now with higher frequencies, higher dimensions, and we cannot understand, and we're labeling them. But they are coming with multidimensional knowledge, and they remember. They're coming and arriving with a residue of where they come from, and we're not acknowledging that. And I think this is what we need to be looking at. Like we need to kind of clear that colonial lens and go deep in our hearts to feel each other again. Because we've learned to be afraid to love. We've been so cubicalized, institutionalized that we're afraid to love. Women were center of this experience, and we need to bring together. And the women are, in my language, we're ebit. They teach the inner world, which is our spirituality, the philosophy of life, intuition, all that. Genome teaches the outer world, the physical protection, what to look out for, and so on. So their role is looking outward. The woman is looking inward, and that's the missing element, the missing ingredient of why we're struggling in these sacred times. We are in the sacred times that we've been told over and over. Understand the ancient symbolisms from your cultural histories and draw on them and bring them forward. These are the bundles.
Miigwech, greatly appreciate that. Somebody had asked. Someone had asked, how do we put together our legacy bundle and what should be a part of our legacy bundles? I'm thinking at this point in time, the way the question sounds to me, you're looking for physical things to put in your bundle. I could be wrong. Is that kind of what you were alluding to? Natalie?
Yes, Michelle. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, was that a question for me, Michelle? You were asking if I was asking.
Were you alluding to the physical stuff you put in your bundle, or were you alluding to the spiritual that everybody's talking about? Because,
yeah, no, my question was more around around the spiritual, and I'm very grateful for the answers that were offered.
Okay, great. I'm glad that question was answered. We do have another question, and let's see, what's the next one going to be? How do we help those with schizophrenia? Or is accepting whatever emerges part of being in the river? And this is, sorry for the segue. Oh,
I I think Miigam'agan might have just answered that, but if
Yeah.
there's someone else that wants to, because I think Mig spoke to that.
Yes.
And I would think the other thing I know that for some people who say aren't Indigenous from this land, there are, questions around, well, am I appropriating or whatever? And I think the big thing is needing to ask your own ancestors for guidance and for help, and looking at your own languages. And if it may be hard to look at your own Indigenous language, like say if you're from South America and you grew up learning Spanish, learning your own Indigenous language can be tricky, but there still may be ways. But the big thing is to ask, and to ask your ancestors, and then things will come to you. And I realize it's hard for some folks who are like, well, I'm 1/5 this and 1/5 that. And I still think something within your DNA resonates, and those answers are within you and within your DNA. So for myself, when I started learning Gaelic, learning the language was huge. And to learn that there is absolutely no word for my, because you don't own anything in my language, nothing. So then that resonated with me about my father always saying the only thing you own in your world is your word. So honesty is the most important thing, and keeping your word is the most important thing. That was drilled into me. Then I learned my language and realized I can't even say my daughter. I describe the relationship, but she's not mine. And so there are ways I think that we can tap in, but the biggest thing I think is just to ask, because without asking, then those answers don't come to you. And I think what Cliff said about being grateful when you jump in the river is also true, because it can be scary to jump in. And I think coming with that attitude of being grateful and having that being open and not allowing fear to control what happens. And when fear does, then it does stop you. I mean, my daughter and I just went through 2 days of not feeling connected to spirit when we found out that my mother in the nursing home, if COVID-19 goes in, will not be sent for any help whatsoever. We will not be allowed to see her, and she will have to pass on her own. And so this morning, my daughter was praying because we were being disconnected and we were clashing with each other. And as she was praying out the window, she said, oh, I know what Mom and I need to do. We need to connect more. We need to remember to smudge in the morning. We need to drink water that the first light is hit. We need to, like Ron said, pray every morning and pray every night. And an eagle came right up to her and came so close she could see the eyes. She could see the beak. She could see the feathers. And she was like, thank you for the answer, because that's what she was doing. She was praying and asking, what do Mom and I need to be doing to get back to being connected to spirit? Because we're hurting, we're grieving, we've been traumatized, like Mig said. So I think asking is the biggest thing.
Miigwech, that was an awesome story. I so enjoyed that one. Adriana has the next question, but I wanted to know what we put in our bundle, and I think that one is definitely a physical question also. I think people are looking for like stuff to hold on to carry. And I do carry some stuff. I carry my drum, I carry my shaker, I carry my medicines. Medicine's very important, what I'm taught. But I also carry special gifts that people have given me along the way that mean something. So as an example, I carry a piece of wampum that I got from from an Oneida Nation person who gave it to me, and I was very thankful for it. And that's gratitude and knowing where it comes and what it means also if you're carrying that physical stuff. And understanding that that too is temporary. It's only stuff. It's not what's in your heart. It's not what's in your mind. And it's certainly not who you are. It's only stuff to reaffirm you, reaffirm to you that you acknowledge more than anybody else acknowledging. That's the way I see my bundle. And it's personal. So when I pull it out and I pull out the stuff, I have the stories. And the only way you're going to hear the stories is if you ask me directly, what is this all about? And for some elders, I don't ask because the story might be like 2 hours long and I might not have that time. So be careful what you ask. Okay, Adriana, would you like to do with the next question?
Yes, I have the next question from Andrea. And I think that is very much a question that I can identify with, given given our own colonization process. We may not understand completely sometimes the image. So the question is, when you spoke of the river rapids and how people jump in or didn't, or try to get out, what did that represent? A time, a place? It's a question directed to Ron.
When William Comanda shared that vision and that description of exactly what the rapids represented as Cliff and Miigam'agan said, and I believe Michelle had mentioned this too. Those are scary times. Those are a place of the unknown, because we're so accustomed as humans wanting things to be normal, as it's been stated, from people that's been online saying we want things to go back to normal. Well, what's normal? It'll never go back to normal. What the rapids represent is that risk taken of the unknown and trusting the ancestors of the unknown. And when you jump in the rapids, the first thing that goes through your mind is, are you going to drown? Your life is at risk, but knowing the fact that you're going through rapids, and there'll be a time where you're going to come to this calmness of the river. That's where that greener pasture, so to speak, is at. That's where that balance, that respect, that connectedness to creation is that we must take a risk, because we're so normal, or we're so accustomed as human beings wanting the easy way. And if the people who have fasted, and as Clifford mentioned when he went to Sundance, and there's a time where I call, when I went to fast, the first day is your pity day, feeling sorry for yourself. You're there without food and water, you're suffering, you're thinking, what am I doing here? Those are really trying times and hard times. But after the second and the third day seems to be that day of enlightening, because what I was taught when I fasted is that you're giving up your physical, everything that you're accustomed to taking in physically, water and food, and you're giving that up to get spiritual teachings and spiritual knowledge and spiritual wisdom. So by the end of the fourth day, you gain all this wisdom and knowledge. If you're sitting there in solitude, in your little space, and watching how everything in creation works in balance and works in unity. And this reflects back to those times, is when you jump in the rapids is like your first day of fasting. You question, why did you jump in the rapids? And then after a while, when that beautiful river smooths out, third day and the fourth day of your fast, you realize, this is why I jumped in the rapids. This is I'm gaining all this wisdom and knowledge from creation and the visions you get from your ancestors through dreams and through your sleep times, or you see them spiritually within nature. So that's the kind of the analogy of the rapids, is that those are those hard times, knowing the fact that we have to take risks. We cannot continue living the way we're living. And because there'll be a few of us, which we've been ridiculed so many times in the way we think by mainstream, society, is when we start talking about getting off of fossil fuels. Well, you drive a car, or how did you how did you get here? You fly, you fly to meetings and so on. Well, we have to get past that and say, okay, maybe we don't need to fly to meetings. Look what we're doing right now. We're meeting. We don't have to fly nowheres. We can meet as a people. This is the answer right here. How we connect to one another. And graciously, the bright minds who created computers, who created Zoom, who created this technical way of connection. I just, last night, we just FaceTime all our 5 kids and our 10 grandkids when we had our Sunday supper, because they usually come here. But we FaceTime while we're having supper. So this is the new vision. This is the new way that once we get at the calmness of realization, we have to shift our entire life to get to that calm effect. So I hope that fulfilled that.
Yeah, I think, like in listening to you, Madeline, you know, your pain and all our pain this is a colonial experience. These conversations would have probably been non-existent if we didn't go through that first initial wave of the disease that dehumanized us and separated us from who we are as human beings. And so, when we look at like rainbow, even like for I know that this is just one Miigam'agan understanding from a dialect of Miigam'agan, but I know if we pass this word on, I think the word rainbow is not so much about human identity or heritage, but about us as human beings. And what, to me, I understand Mingwan, what that means in our language is me is the life force, one is the heart, and so Mingwan is talking about us coming together with to that heart, to the coming back to the heart way of being. This is the source of the life that we've been all severed from. So it we just want to acknowledge you, and want to thank you for sharing and expressing yourself in the deepest way, touching our hearts. I know you for a very long time, and you've been quite an inspiration to many, and you've been committed in doing the work for a long time. Thank you.
Miigwech, for those beautiful words. Unfortunately, we are down and out of time. So I've taken down the emails of people that have dropped by, dropped them off, and I will get these emails off to the people that they have requested to speak with. Miigam'agan, if you could please be kind enough to lead us in a prayer out, and may you all have a very beautiful day. And I hope you have lots to think about. Miigwech for attending.
Chichahamijina. Niwe and Landaligan Moyakimachuan. Niwe and Landamawali. Landamawali, Chimachuan, which Imachuahan. The Wachtima Liwedman and I was just Hamuri. The big Natin and Unahartan and Najuahan. Benedictor Nakuhin Chikunjanina, Dandesit Risis, Dandesit Stoho, Dandesit Sisik, Dandesit Ninaj, Lewaktamai, Negmaway, Abaju, Abaja Aikti, Abaju Loti, Chirusit. We were in Dandalia Didewi, we were in Dandalit Hanuadige, we were in Dandelman and Nubulus. Lali o hebide o fia, Dandel mawadu o hula, Dandeli maukobidai, Nigi Dandel duwadu o kulisuahan, Nega self-tufinen, Uxalanen, Udeo Sofnen Vinu.
Oh,
Good.
Oh, well, and thank you, elders, for your time. It is greatly appreciated. And I know there are people that want to keep in touch. So I hope we do stay in touch, and we will have another webinar. There was actually, it just got told, 32 people online. Yay. Yes. High five. Okay. So we'll see you guys at the next webinar, and miigwech everyone for participating.